Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dissenter Weekly update for October 29th, 2020. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com. And before we get rolling our whistleblower stories with our whistleblower stories for the week, Brian has a few things for you.
Hello, everybody. This is Brian. It's good to be back with you. Just your regular reminder to make sure that you are following us wherever you are watching right now. We are on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all over the place. And if you like our work, particularly the work Kevin has been doing on the Assange case, on whistleblowing, press freedom, highly encourage you to sort of step up and support with a donation. You can head on over to shadowproof.com/donate, or you can head on over to dissenter.substack.com to give directly to Kevin's excellent newsletter. That's just the housekeeping right there. So I think we got some good stories here. Let's just dive right in. First one we have for this week, we have a whistleblower who exposed ex-EPA chief's scandalous conduct, sues EPA over retaliation. Why don't you walk us through this first story, Kev?
This involves Scott Pruitt, and obviously good riddance. I'm glad that he's been out, even though he basically replaced himself with a clone who was also a lobbyist for the fossil fuel industry. But apparently there's a whistleblower named Kevin Gosztola who was involved in working as a part of his administration, involved in staffing matters, and refused to sign off and approve some of the ways in which he was choosing to use the taxpayer dollars that were at his disposal as the EPA administrator. And so there's a whistleblower retaliation lawsuit that he filed. He is a political appointee. He was the deputy chief of staff for operations. This was the story that I sent out to everyone who's a free subscriber of the Dissenter. And so to briefly summarize, what's really significant here is it speaks to the politicization of branches within the Trump administration. We see that Gosztola, even though he does come out of a group of people who supported Donald Trump, because he was willing to do oversight and did go to a House committee and complain about Scott Pruitt's actions, he basically got put on a list of people deemed disloyal to the government, and he's no longer employable. He's no longer employable under Trump. I think it's an open question whether he's employable under a second term of Trump or a Joe Biden administration. And so that's because he was someone who was willing to describe what Scott Pruitt was doing and how he was violating laws and rules to not only a House committee, but also to go to the press. He spoke to multiple media organizations about what he was seeing. And it wasn't his job. It really wasn't his role to do oversight, but he still felt like he had a duty to say something about the way Scott Pruitt was abusing his power. And so what we learned from this lawsuit is not entirely new. This was out in the open, but it pieces together the narrative, and it tells basically that he was spending funds on travel that he was abusing. He was putting money into quote unquote office improvements, and he was using staff for personal tasks. And primarily, the thing that I focused upon in my write-up was that Pruitt spent more than $120,000 of public funds during a June 2017 trip to Italy that an EPA lobbyist organized under the guise of a meeting with environmental ministers from the G7 countries. The trip included $30,500 worth of security detail, and nearly $90,000 was spent on food, hotels, commercial airfare, as well as an $11,000 military jet that was used by the administrator and 9 of his staffers. And anytime you're doing scheduling in these cabinet positions, you're supposed to look for faster and cheaper options to keep the budget expenses down. But he made the EPA shell out $11,000 for this flight simply to get these staffers and himself from Cincinnati to New York for their trip to Italy. And when Chmielewski objected to these expenditures, he was allegedly told by Scott Pruitt himself, "I don't care. I'm a cabinet secretary. Make it happen." So he wanted to engage in this kind of routine travel where there was a blanket waiver on having to take cheaper options, having to take coach if it was available, and not necessarily be in first class or be in business options. All of this was reported previously. This is what ultimately led to his resignation. And in fact, Chmielewski takes credit for playing a part in this resignation that happened very publicly back in, I believe it was in July of 2018, I think. And so Chmielewski was also present from May 2017 to February 2018, where he saw that there were meetings that were being held in secret, and then they were concealed. They were removed from a calendar that he privately kept, Scott Pruitt kept. He was meeting with coal, mining, oil industry, and fertilizer businessmen. There was efforts to falsify the schedule, and many of these people came from Oklahoma, where Scott Pruitt was Attorney General and had served the interests of the fossil fuel industry and other industries while he was Attorney General. So he brought that work to the Trump administration and continued to push for deregulation and allow greater environmental pollution, which is what we've seen. It's been a hallmark of the Trump administration to change the way in which the EPA operates from one that has this pretext of caring about the environment to one that is essentially trying to neutralize environmental regulations so that they are not a nuisance for corporations and businesses in the United States. It's something that, the next, if Joe Biden is elected, that's something that will need to be grappled with, this entire deregulation of pollutants that has gone on, and then the way in which industry executives have been welcomed into the administration. And so, that's not exactly what Chmielewski was challenging, but at the same time, he seemed to care that this kind of activity was happening in total secret and that there wasn't more transparency and that they were abusing the use of taxpayer dollars. So we know that, according to him, that Corey Lewandowski was in communication with him. This is, of course, someone who was in the Trump campaign, who's a figure who has had media jobs ever since he left had a kind of, well, not really a falling out with the Trump administration, became a liability because he was such a crass individual. He apparently notified Chmielewski that Scott Pruitt no longer wanted him, that he had fallen out of favor with Scott Pruitt. There were people who came to him on February 12th, 2018 and said, "Pruitt wants you to resign effective immediately." He was urged to sign a form and resign, but he refused to do so. And then ultimately, they basically just pretended like he didn't exist anymore, that he no longer was an employee. And then they sent him a form that made it look like he had resigned, but he never signed anything. So they act like he resigned, but really he was forced out. And they wouldn't officially fire him because they didn't want anybody in like an inspector general's office or anyone in Congress finding out why exactly he no longer was an employee at the EPA. He tried to get a job as recently as March 2020 with the Energy Department to continue on being involved in scheduling kind of, standard bureaucratic staffing obligations and tasks that he would have had to carry out. And he was rejected primarily because he has this record of challenging the Trump administration or challenging Trump administration officials like Scott Pruitt. So I think this is important because it shows the lengths in which we have Donald Trump and his cronies and people who work under him enforcing this kind of loyalty that you are not going to speak and challenge the way people do their jobs.
Thanks, Kevin. Let's move on to our next story, where we have the Department of Homeland Security is urging employees to report colleagues who leak. What do you have here?
So this, I'll actually go to, well, first let's set this up. So about a week or so ago, the Undersecretary for Management at Homeland Security Department, his name is Randolph D. Texalis, sent out a kind of ominous sounding letter that warned employees not to disclose confidential or classified information to unauthorized individuals. But according to government executive, it did not remind employees they had rights under whistleblower protection laws, which violates regulations and is widely viewed as unlawful. There are several groups that represent government employees, a union group, and then the Government Accountability Project, which takes on whistleblower cases, complained because it's been frequent that these sorts of letters have been sent out to people during the Trump administration as they loathe the way in which they've not been able to control their employees and prevent them from talking to the media and becoming sources for stories that reflect poorly on Donald Trump. But you're supposed to include a section that makes it evident that, okay, well, we don't want you to leak confidential or classified information or even sensitive information, but you do know that if you see something and you do say something, you want to go to a House committee or you want to go to any of these proper channels, you're allowed to do that. You're supposed to always make it clear that this isn't an attempt to chill anyone's right to become a whistleblower. And so then we have that Ken Klippenstein shared a tweet that had the copy of this email that went out threatening consequences to people, the very thing that is central to this, that has been challenged. We've had this Dear Colleague letter is something that groups have been asking the Homeland Security Department to rescind. I'm not exactly sure if they took it back. My guess is they haven't. I haven't seen any headline to that effect. But they not only go on to outline this claim that unauthorized disclosures violate DHS policy and potentially federal law, so they're criminalizing any kind of leaks. But they go on to say that all DHS personnel, anyone in the Homeland Security Department, should be reporting the following to your security office. And it reads, anyone you suspect of providing classified, sensitive but unclassified, controlled unclassified information, or draft information to unauthorized personnel. So very clearly, they're not just talking about information that's classified, but they're talking about information that I could share, or anyone in government should be able to share. Anyone should be able to use their free speech rights. People like Kevin Gosztola, who might want to talk about how a cabinet official is abusing taxpayer money. That could be deemed sensitive. It could be controlled unclassified information. So any of these people could be committing an act that's referred to the security office, which they're going to be looking into for a possible prosecution, or you might be fired from the Homeland Security Department. They also say any request for classified, sensitive, but unclassified, controlled unclassified information or draft information outside the scope of the requester's responsibilities. And parsing that, it almost seems like what they're saying is you need to report any journalists that are fishing for information from the Homeland Security Department about what the Homeland Security Department is doing to carry out its functions, any abuses or any misconduct or whatever they're doing to carry out Homeland Security business. It doesn't, I mean, I see requester, I think of Freedom of Information Act requests, but I suppose it's not necessarily just that. It could be, if somebody from a newspaper gave you a phone call, they want you to basically inform the security office that you've been called by a journalist. So that is, very McCarthyist of them. It seems to reflect the way in which insider threat programs have been developed in that culture that has been planted and has definitely metastasized ever since the WikiLeaks disclosures. And of course, it was ramped up when Edward Snowden came forward as an NSA whistleblower revealing mass surveillance programs. So this is something to keep tabs on. I don't think it's resolved. It reflects something very common. We see loyalty pledges, as we were talking about previously with the EPA whistleblower. We see efforts to get people to sign things. In fact, I neglected to mention, related to Ken Milewski, that he was asked to sign a form or answer a questionnaire about his loyalty to President Donald Trump. That definitely had me doing a double take, but it actually says that in his lawsuit, that he was asked to fill out a questionnaire related to his loyalty to President Donald Trump. And so you have that, and then you have efforts to impose gag orders against employees to say that you don't have any free speech rights and you are not allowed to speak to journalists. And so this is something to definitely keep paying close attention.
Thanks, Kevin. Let's move on to Texas, where we have 7 whistleblowers who were purged from the Attorney General's office in that state. What is this story?
So the local press in Texas have been following for the last week and a half several employees who accused Attorney General Ken Paxton of criminal acts. And now, really in just the last 12 hours, we've had the total come up to 7 people who have either been forced out, fired, or just outright resigned because they do not feel there's a place for them anymore in his office, or that maybe the time that they're going to be allowed to stay on as officials in his office has grown very small. And so they have left, and they signed on to a complaint not too long ago, back in mid-October, early October, actually. They said that they told law enforcement that they believed that Paxton had committed bribery or been involved in abuse of his office that was aimed at serving the interests of a political donor. His name is Nate Paul. He's a Austin real estate investor. And naturally, Paxton's a Republican. These people are immediately upon being challenged, they lash out at any whistleblowers, and he called them rogues. And so we see, as the Austin American-Statesman summarized, that this was actually a stunning development because they did work in this office, which has typically been tight-knit. As this newspaper put it, their decisions to report possible illegal activity involving their employer represents a stunning development in an agency that prizes loyalty, particularly from within Paxton's inner circle. It places a renewed spotlight on Paxton, who is already under indictment for alleged securities fraud. So essentially, I don't know a whole lot about Ken Paxton. I've just been learning about him in the last week. I feel sincerely sorry for Texans because it seems like he's actually an open criminal and should be forced to resign immediately, or should be put in handcuffs and not be allowed to come anywhere near the office, because it seems like he's definitely been using it to enrich himself and to also get away with criminal activity that would land you or me certainly in jail for a short amount of time, and we'd be facing prosecution. He's accused of securities fraud, effort to solicit investors in a company, and he didn't reveal that this tech company was paying him for work. He's accused of first-degree felonies, and the maximum isn't low. I mean, the number of felonies he's facing, if given the maximum, could result in 99 years in prison. It won't. That's just a dramatic way of illustrating the fact that he's accused of some serious misconduct. He's accused of not registering with state security regulators while conducting other investment business, and yet still he remains in charge, and he absolutely detests the fact that people within his office have put him under scrutiny and accused him of being a criminal. And so that is what's going on here. And I don't know where these 7 individuals are going to land. Seems like some of them are going to find places. These are mostly Republican or conservative types, and they do have organizations that they can go turn to. But they have had their lives disrupted because this person who is in charge of this office is a criminal.
Thanks, Kevin. Our next story involves Edward Snowden, who has been granted permanent residency in Russia, and where he remains in exile. What is the update with Ed Snowden?
So this was reported many days ago, and I just wanted to get in on it because I am sensitive to the way that our mainstream media or the establishment media covered this story. Certainly, they have Russia on the brain, and they want to make it seem like this completes his full evolution from a U.S. citizen to a total traitor who is now living in Russia. And recently, in the last 24 hours, we've heard news that is positive for Edward Snowden and his wife, because they're going to be welcoming a child, and potentially that child could become a Russian citizen if they would choose to do that, or they could allow their newborn to be an American and still allow him or her to be from the United States. It's up to them because they still have their citizenship from the United States. But bottom line is, we see a lot of when you read between the lines, kind of, the sort of like anti-communism that runs within these kinds of reportings, playing to that Red Scare mentality. And certainly another thing that I picked up is in an NBC News coverage, you have his lawyer reporting that he's seeking permanent residency, and it was granted. And they're sourcing it back to Russian state media outlets rather than just his lawyer, who is the one that is actually the source with the information. The lawyer that represents him is the one who knows that he has obtained the permanent residency, and yet we see them being like, it's from TASS. And that, I think, is a way of heightening this whole kind of hysterical attitude that they have about where Snowden fits in geopolitics. And so I referenced that, and I'm not the only place that has pointed this out, but I wanted to take a quick moment here to go over the mere fact that Edward Snowden is in Russia, not by his own choice. Most people who follow this show probably are already educated enough to understand it, but it's worth going over again, especially since Joe Biden could be president of the United States in the next few months. And so he was stuck in Moscow because the State Department revoked his passport, and he became trapped there. He could no longer proceed with the help of WikiLeaks, a WikiLeaks staff member, Sarah Harrison, who was trying to help him get to Ecuador. And we know from reporting that, in fact, it was Joe Biden who was making calls and contacted Ecuador President Rafael Correa and told him that, not to allow Edward Snowden to get to Ecuador, not to allow him to have asylum if he got to Ecuador, not to allow him to be admitted into Ecuador, essentially. And basically, they had this conversation, and Correa later opened up that there were trade sanctions that were potentially threatened against Ecuador if he did not go ahead and block Snowden's effort to obtain asylum in Ecuador, and that relations just would deteriorate. They wouldn't be good. This is about standard. This is what we learned from the WikiLeaks revelations that came out in the U.S. diplomatic cables. This is the kind of mafia-like way of doing diplomacy that the United States engages in when it comes to people who have challenged the U.S. and are seeking asylum, or when it comes to U.S. war crimes and torture and other criminality that has been committed. And they did this kind of thing to try and suppress investigations into the Bush administration when they were accused of crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. it continues today, with the most extreme example being that Donald Trump's administration has sanctioned people who are involved in the International Criminal Court and trying to hold U.S. military officers accountable for war crimes in Afghanistan. And so Vice President Joe Biden was definitely someone who tried to obstruct Snowden, and he played a part back in 2013 in Snowden becoming what he is now, a permanent resident of Russia, but a citizen of the United States still nonetheless. And Snowden said so on MSNBC when he was promoting his memoir. It was Biden and it was John Kerry when he was Secretary of State. They were both going around saying things like, look, this is his quote, "We don't know what the law is. We don't care if you could do this or not. We understand that protecting whistleblowers and granting asylum is a matter of human rights, and you could do this if you want to. But if you protect this man, if you let this guy out of Russia, there will be consequences. We're not going to say what they're going to be, but there will be a response." Sounds like a mafia don to me. I've watched a fair amount of films where people act like this. It sounds like somebody who's trying to use their monopoly of violence in order to make sure that someone doesn't do anything that crosses them. So that is why Snowden is not free, essentially, if you believe that he's being somehow repressed, if you believe he's a pawn because he has to mind himself in Russia. This is why he can't return home to the United States. At any moment, Joe Biden can correct this sin. He can toss out the indictment. He can end the prosecution. He can acknowledge that there are courts here in the United States that have found that what he disclosed revealed that there was illegal and unconstitutional surveillance being conducted by the NSA. If he is president, he can have his Justice Department unravel all of this. But as of this moment, this is why Snowden remains in Russia.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's wrap the show up with an update on Julian Assange's case. And I think you have a couple of things that you wanted to raise as well. So why don't you let us know what's going on with Assange?
Yeah, so let's do Assange and then those few housekeeping items. And it's a nice kind of pivot because this is another thing that if Joe Biden is elected, he'll have the ability to rectify. He'll be able to abandon going after Julian Assange if he would so choose. Of course, we have him on record calling Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist back in 2010, and he was referring to the disclosures that are central to this prosecution, but the ball is in his court. He'll be able to make a choice. And so there was an Assange hearing. It was a case management hearing that took place on October 29th. This was about the day or maybe the day before that the defense was supposed to submit their closing argument and provide that to the judge. And they were given an extension of a week because there are materials that Julian Assange has still not been able to see. There's been some issues with his access and being able to participate in putting together his defense. Those have been persistent throughout this case. And fortunately for him, the judge gave the legal team an extension so they can do some more work. And then after that, it's possible that the prosecution will delay and they're going to have more time to file their response to the defense's closing argument. But as of now, we have no change in the date for finding out a decision or finding out what that decision is. It's still supposed to be announced on January 4th. So in the timeline, we'll have two more case management hearings, one in November and December, likely before that January 4th date. So there's not too much more to add. There were some issues in the past week or so with the heating or the way that ventilation was working in the Belmarsh prison, or I guess not working, and there were complaints that were put out, and those were fixed. But between both of us following the way that prisons and jails fall into disrepair, that this is quite common, that you hear from prisoners who are complaining or detainees who are complaining, and it takes their outcry to force technical repairs so that they are no longer freezing cold or boiling in their cells. And so that was something that has transpired in the last couple of weeks. Now, the housekeeping items that I wanted to make one follow-up comment about the Hunter Biden email story, and specifically the fact that the New York Post was locked out of their Twitter account. And that as of a day or two ago, it was 2 weeks that the New York Post was not able to get into their account and share the story that they put together on the emails that they obtained from this laptop that allegedly belonged to Hunter Biden, as they claimed. And what I wanted to say here was that Jack Dorsey, the Twitter CEO, was one of the 3 executives who went to Capitol Hill and testified in a Senate hearing this past week. And he was asked directly about why the New York Post didn't have access to their Twitter account. And, I remind you, it's a few days before Election Day, and they should be able to participate in the discourse about whether they want to criticize Trump, whether they want to put out adversarial reporting against Trump, or whether they want to put out adversarial reporting against Joe Biden. And the answer that Dorsey gave was they have to log into their account, which they can do at this minute, delete the original tweet, which fell under our original enforcement action, and they can tweet the exact same material to the exact same article, and it would go through. And the reason why I'm raising this is because it's so incoherent and absurd. And I think people should know that Twitter has admitted their original enforcement action was overboard and it was excessive, and they were wrong to impose the kind of censorship that they imposed on the New York Post, going so far as to even make it impossible for people to share the link over direct message. So I couldn't even talk with Brian about how I thought the article was fake news if I wanted to. If I didn't believe it and I thought it was conspiratorial and some kind of October surprise, I couldn't have a private conversation as someone who's an editor of a media organization and decide how to handle a response to it if I thought this was something I wanted to do. And certainly I follow leaks. I follow this kind of journalism. I follow the way that people report stories on allegedly hacked materials. This is something that is of public interest, and I couldn't have that basic communication. We're fortunate there's other ways that I can talk to Brian, but if we only were connected over direct message, that would have been foreclosed by the way in which Twitter was imposing its censorship. And so I say to everyone that I think we are making a huge mistake here as progressives or people on the left if we allow right-wing Republicans to dominate this conversation. We see that in these committee hearings, they are the ones that are asking some of the best questions to the executives of Twitter, Facebook, Google about the authority they are claiming. And meanwhile, you hear neoliberal Democrats or even progressive Democrats, shame on them, who are saying that these companies need to be, quote unquote, referees of democracy. They need to be policing speech because we just can't take a risk that Donald Trump is reelected for a second term. And we have to use kid gloves, and we have to protect Joe Biden's path to a victory. We've gone through so much, so this is what they're basically saying, that anything that is questionable must be removed from Twitter, and without any evidence, saying it's a Russian disinformation plot, it's an Iranian disinformation plot, it's probably a Chinese disinformation plot, etc., etc. And I think we should be very careful here, because the GOP is the most outraged at these companies right now. And to the extent that they maintain any influence in our legislative branch, and also to the extent that they populate our courts at the state and the federal level, Now, certainly they control the Supreme Court. We're going to see them be determining the policy solution for how to handle this. We're going to see them coming up with the answer to what these companies are doing. And I don't know, actually, I'm fairly certain that what they want to do isn't going to bring more democracy and freedom to us all. It's not going to be a victory for freedom of expression, whatever they propose. And by us not being part of the conversation, by us pretending like this is just an issue between the companies and people who are right-wing ideologues or fascists who are involved in hate speech, I think we're oversimplifying, and we're not really doing a good service to ourselves because, in fact, it's evident that Mark Zuckerberg and these other executives are playing politics in the way that Barack Obama plays politics. And they're acting pragmatically now. And they're going to remove some people who are far right, and they're going to remove some people who are far left. So they're going to purge people who are engaging in white supremacy, but they're also going to purge people who support Palestinian rights. And they're going to purge people who are for freedom in Venezuela and supporting Nicolas Maduro against the United States' coup plot. They're going to go after people who are from Nicaragua and Bolivia who are promoting socialist ideas and look like they might be under some kind of control from Iran or Russia. And that's the way that people within the State Department or other agencies in the US government will probably talk about them and justifying, recommending to these Silicon Valley companies that they are purged. So if you lose some people on the right, we're also going to lose some people on the left. What it means is we're just constraining what is acceptable discourse to that squishy center middle, those neoliberals that are intolerable and insufferable like Neera Tanden, and those neoconservatives like Max Boot and David Frum and those other people who are supposed to be our thought leaders now as they lead the Mick resistance against Donald Trump. And I think we really should think about this because it's not going to go away if Donald Trump is defeated. His loss at the polls isn't going to change this culture that has developed where we're basically seeing what made these platforms worthwhile for us just completely deteriorate and no longer be that valuable to pushing freedom and democracy. I mean, I think you might talk to more activists now that say we have to get off of these platforms. We have to find ways in the meat space, so to speak, to talk to everyone and find a way to organize without relying. Because if you cross any lines, and you might be accused of inciting a riot if you're talking about something related to state or local governments and organizing protests around Black Lives Matter. And so if that's the case, then you're suspended for a temporary amount of time or you're completely purged from Twitter. And I think we should really consider what is happening here and don't cede this discussion to right-wing people and conservative voices. Don't let them be the ones that get to claim that they are the champions of free speech, because we know that they often are the worst people because they do not like having their speech scrutinized and they do not want to be held accountable in the court of public opinion. And so anything that they have to say is often cynical and an effort to serve their own personal interests. So that's my rant. That's what I have to say as we head into the election day on Tuesday. And obviously, I'm not here to make any predictions on what will happen. But I think in terms of the work that I'm doing when I'm working on whistleblower stories and I'm paying attention to different partisan arguments that come up about whistleblowers and leaking, I think this is something that has to be said because there is a decline here that has happened in the media profession. We really don't want to go down the route where we're insisting that people have to show their work and tell any details about where they got their material from, like who these sources were and whether they were hacked or how they were gotten. And if it was illegal, then we're not allowed to publish those stories. that's going to take away a whole load of journalism that is important to protecting the country from further decline. And everyone looks around, we can already see how bad a lot of things have gotten. And I think we need to wake up and recognize that there are steps that there's a cliff here, and we're not far from going off entirely if we aren't careful about the way in which we react to certain developments.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it's definitely shaping up to be an interesting fight, depending on how the election is going between the conversations around Section 230. We have former Facebook executives overseeing the ethics aspect of the Joe Biden presidential transition team. It's definitely, I guess on one side, you have the Republicans insisting that the government should basically do nothing and that private corporations should do everything and make those decisions. And then on the Democrat side, we invite the corporations to govern, I guess. Those are the two flavors of government that we were offered. So
yeah, and the one thing I'll just quickly throw out is that, if we're going to continue down this pace and we're going to continue and extend the way of thinking, let's say if Joe Biden pulls this off, if the polls are to be believed and he does thump Donald Trump the way he does, and then we get back to the work that we do and the distraction of the election is no longer there, which has been a major distraction for us, especially in the past month and a half. But if I get back to the work that I really care about, covering Julian Assange's case, and I report on it, well, the people around Joe Biden believe that Julian Assange has been functionally working for the Russian government. And, if I'm somebody who's outspoken, who supports Julian Assange, if my work as a journalist is more to them propaganda and not the kind of adversarial journalism that is needed on this political prosecution, what kind of censorship do we have to face? What kind of things are they going to do to, I think there are activists that have already been removed from the site within the Free Assange community. But what's going to happen to journalists, especially those that might have gotten jobs for state-funded media who are, funded by, either any of the people we deem to be adversaries. There's Iranian, Chinese, and Russian and Venezuelan outlets that have funded people here in the United States who can't get jobs in the normal press because their thoughts and their views and the kind of commitment they have to certain subjects are just not tolerable. They're not permitted to be there. So needing a job, needing something to do, they go and work for those outlets, and they give up a little bit of independence, but they also are able to derive income and pay their bills and still speak on certain issues that need to be spoken on. And so I don't have to keep going, but I just say, we've already gone for about 40 minutes here, but I just say in conclusion that I think we shouldn't presume that things are just going to be rosy once Joe Biden gets in the White House. I think all these people, these Democratic Party operatives that are going to be in and around him, and he's an old man, and he's not going to be able to keep up on all of this. I think in some ways we could suggest that if he is elected, he's going to govern in much the same way as Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has taken a step back and allowed a lot of his staff to just do whatever they're supposed to do in their positions. And, I don't want to know about it unless I need to know about it, and you just go do it. And I think that might be the case with Joe Biden, that we're going to find in a lot of these positions, they're just doing that work. Joe Biden doesn't have a clue what's happening in these agencies until he actually has to know about what's happening in these agencies because it's devolved into a scandal or there's some kind of controversy. And then, by that time, the damage might be done because certain operatives were already empowered to do whatever and have their way. So, that said, thank you for watching the show. I'll give my normal plug, which is to encourage you to go to dissenter.substack.com and to become a subscriber, because if you go there, you'll be able to get a free report every week on the kind of whistleblower stories that we talk about on this show. And there's an exclusive report that I send out toward the end of the week, whether that's Friday or Saturday, You get something that I don't share with anybody else except for you, as part of acknowledging that you are making a step. You are giving some of your own income to me in order to make it possible for us to do this journalistic work that has to be done on this subject. And then, of course, you can support Shadowproof in general if you would like to just keep this going, because if you do donate to Shadowproof, then not only do I have the ability to do this and have this platform, but we also get to fund freelance journalism and give other voices a chance to do what they would like to do. And obviously there's limited opportunities right now out there in the world. And so we like to do our part to be job creators and let them have chances. A small business owner. I mean, those are in vogue, right? Like that's what that's what we're supposed to be standing
we have
up.
all the politicians' ears.
Yeah, no, I mean, Republicans or Democrats, what we're saying is you need to give us grant money so that we need to be in the stimulus deal. That stimulus deal that we're never ever going to get. We should be in that stimulus deal. All right, so I conclude with that, and I give everyone the best wishes and hope you're all able to keep your anxiety levels at a comfortable level, a manageable level, and know that in 5 or 6 days, I think it's going to be, well, at least have closure.
Yeah,
there is that.
We'll see. Next Thursday, we may know who's the president. We may not know. I guess we'll have to see a week from today. So
I suppose I don't know what kind of show we'll be doing. Maybe we'll be talking about all the anonymous sources coming out about the election and what they're claiming did or did not happen. But hopefully we don't have to do that sort of a show.
Right. Hopefully not. Thank you, Kevin. We will talk to everybody next week. Just make sure you're following us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you like. And we will see you then. Take care.